The crowd stopped screaming the moment the human chose mercy. The arena of Veros Prime smelled like hot steel, ozone, and wet sand baked beneath 3 artificial suns. More than 80,000 spectators filled the towering black stone coliseum, their voices rolling through the air like distant thunder while neon banners rippled across the upper decks. High above the blood-colored pit, royal emblems glowed in silver fire, marking the presence of the imperial family. Every seat was occupied, every eye focused downward, because the human was still standing. Ethan Vale pulled in a slow breath through split lips as sweat rolled down the side of his face and disappeared into the collar of his battered combat harness. Sand clung to his boots. His right shoulder ached from impact. The muscles across his back burned like live wires beneath old scars. Around him, shattered pieces of arena drones sparked against the ground, their blue circuitry flickering weakly in the dust. The crowd wanted a finishing blow. They always did. A massive alien gladiator remained on one knee several feet away, breathing hard, one arm wrapped protectively around his injured side. The creature's gray armor had cracked during the match, exposing pale skin beneath. Fear flickered behind his black eyes as he stared up at Ethan, waiting for the final strike the arena demanded. Above them, thousands of voices began chanting in unison. Finish it! Finish it! Finish it! Ethan looked toward the royal balcony. Rows of nobles watched from velvet chambers lined with gold, crystal, and floating lanterns. Most looked bored. Some looked hungry. None looked surprised. Violence had become entertainment here a long time ago. Ethan slowly lowered the electrified spear in his hand. The chanting faltered. A few confused murmurs spread across the arena. Then Ethan reached down instead. He grabbed the fallen gladiator beneath the arm and pulled him carefully back to his feet. Silence hit the Colosseum harder than an explosion. Even the arena announcers stopped speaking. The alien gladiator stared at Ethan in disbelief. Why? He whispered through a damaged translator collar. Ethan shrugged tiredly. Because. You're done fighting. Somewhere high above, crystal goblets stopped clinking. The silence deepened. Then the gates behind Ethan opened with a mechanical groan. Heat spilled from the tunnel beyond. Another challenger. Bigger this time. The crowd erupted instantly, relieved by the promise of fresh violence. Ethan rolled his shoulders once and stepped forward into the center of the arena. 27 feet away, a towering beast emerged from the shadows, wrapped in black armor plates and restraint cables glowing red along its spine. Steam hissed from its breathing mask. The thing was easily 9 feet tall and broad enough to block the tunnel lights behind it. The audience roared with excitement. Ethan simply exhaled through his nose. You've got to be kidding me. His translator crackled as the announcer's voice thundered across the stadium. Final challenge of the 47th trial. Survive and earn your freedom. Freedom. Ethan almost laughed at the word. Nobody earned freedom here. Not really. Not on Veros Prime. Not inside an empire that sold living beings to cheering crowds while nobles drank silver wine above their heads. The beast charged. Sand exploded beneath its feet. Ethan moved instantly, sliding sideways as the creature crashed past him with enough force to shake the ground. The arena lights flashed white. Metal screamed against stone. Ethan grabbed a broken chain from the floor and wrapped it once around his forearm before sprinting forward again. Fast. Controlled. Precise. The way Marines were taught back on Earth before Earth forgot about him. The creature swung again. Ethan ducked beneath the massive arm, planted one boot against the wall, and launched himself upward. The chain snapped tight around the beast's restraint cables. Sparks burst across the arena ceiling. The crowd rose to its feet. Seconds later, the giant creature stumbled, collapsed heavily into the sand, and stayed there breathing but no longer fighting. Ethan landed hard on one knee, chest heaving. The arena fell silent again, not because he won, but because he spared it. Again, high above the arena floor, hidden behind silver curtains and glowing white lanterns, Princess Lysara slowly stood from her throne. Her turquoise skin shimmered beneath the palace lights like moonlight across deep water. Long silver-white hair spilled over one shoulder as golden eyes remained fixed entirely on the human below. Around her, nobles whispered in confusion. But Lysara said nothing, because for the first time in her life, the princess had just witnessed something the Empire could not understand. A warrior powerful enough to destroy, choosing not to. The chains around Ethan Vale's wrists were colder than the arena floor. They hummed softly with blue electrical current as two armored guards escorted him through the lower tunnels beneath the Colosseum. Overhead, the roar of 80,000 spectators still echoed through the ancient structure like distant thunder trapped inside stone. Ethan could smell engine oil, recycled air, and scorched metal drifting through the narrow corridor. Somewhere farther below, another arena gate slammed shut with enough force to shake dust loose from the ceiling. Nobody spoke to him. The guards avoided eye contact entirely. That was new. Usually after a victory match, they mocked him, shoved him, treated him like an animal that had simply survived one more round inside the pit. But tonight felt different. Ethan noticed it immediately. The servants moving through the tunnels kept staring. So did the technicians operating the hovering medical drones. Word had already spread across Veros Prime. The human spared his enemies again. One of the guards finally broke the silence. You embarrassed the arena. Ethan glanced sideways without slowing his pace. Good. The guard's jaw tightened beneath his helmet. The crowd paid to watch domination. Then they should ask for a refund. The second guard nearly choked trying not to laugh. They stopped before a massive black door marked with glowing silver symbols Ethan did not recognize. Royal markings. Even from here, he could feel cooler air leaking through the seams. Cleaner air. Rich people air. One guard entered a code into the control panel. The doors slid open soundlessly. Ethan stepped inside and immediately noticed the silence. No screaming crowds. No machinery grinding. Against stone. Only soft music somewhere far away, mixed with the faint sound of flowing water. The chamber beyond looked less like part of the arena and more like another world entirely. White marble floors stretched beneath hanging silver lanterns. Thin streams of glowing water moved through narrow channels carved into the floor, reflecting pale blue light across the walls. Massive windows overlooked the city of Veros Prime beyond the palace district. Towers of black steel and neon stretched for miles beneath the night sky. Small aircraft drifted between skyscrapers like glowing insects. Ethan stared for half a second before muttering, "This place probably has heated towels." It does. The voice came from above him. Calm. Female. Controlled. Ethan looked up slowly. Princess Lysara stood at the top of a curved staircase lined with silver fire bowls. Her white and gold robes shimmered softly beneath the lantern light, flowing behind her with every step she took downward. Up close, she looked even less human than she had from the arena balcony. Her turquoise skin carried a faint iridescent glow beneath the light. Gold markings traced elegant patterns along her wrists and collarbone like living jewelry. But it was her eyes that held him still. Bright gold. Sharp. Observant. The eyes of someone used to being obeyed instantly. Two royal guards moved beside her until she raised one hand slightly. They stopped immediately. Ethan noticed that too. Power without effort. Lysara studied him for several quiet seconds. Her gaze moved across the bruises on his face, the worn combat harness, the dried arena sand still clinging to his boots. "You do not kneel," she finally said. Ethan looked around the massive chamber once. Did not seem popular last time. One corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. "Most beings kneel because they fear me." Ethan shrugged carefully against the restraint chains. "I do not even know you." The room became very still. One of the guards looked horrified. Another reached toward a weapon before Lysara stopped him with another small gesture. She descended the final step slowly until only a few feet separated them. Ethan realized then that she was taller than most human women by several inches, though somehow lighter in the way she moved. Like gravity affected her differently. "You spared two opponents tonight," she said quietly. "Both would have killed you if given the chance." Ethan met her eyes directly. Maybe. Still did not mean they deserved to die. Mercy weakens rulers. Then it is a good thing I am not trying to rule anybody. Silence again. But this time it felt different. Curious instead of hostile. Lysara circled him slowly, studying him like a puzzle that refused to fit together properly. "Humans are called Deathworlders across 12 systems," she said. "Violent. Aggressive. Territorial." Ethan nodded once. "Sounds about right. Then why would a Deathworlder choose mercy inside an arena?" Ethan looked toward the giant city beyond the windows. Neon lights reflected across the glass like distant stars drowning in smoke. When he answered, his voice came quieter. Because if this place takes that from me too, then it wins. For the first time since entering the chamber, Princess Lysara had no response. Rain fell over Vero's prime in silver lines thick enough to blur the city lights beyond the palace windows. Ethan stood alone beside a massive glass wall, nearly 200 feet above the lower districts, watching streams of aircraft cut through the storm like glowing needles. Somewhere far below, sirens echoed between the towers. The Empire never truly slept. Behind him, soft mechanical clicks echoed through the chamber as servant drones quietly removed the restraint cuffs from his wrists. The cold pressure vanished instantly. Red marks remained around his skin. Ethan rubbed one wrist slowly. "That is the first time those things came off in 3 years," he muttered. One of the drones paused for half a second as if confused by the statement, then continued floating silently away. The royal chamber felt unnaturally calm compared to the arena below. Warm air drifted through hidden vents carrying the scent of cedar smoke, and something sweet Ethan could not identify. The polished black ceiling reflected pale lantern light like still water. No chains, no shouting crowds, no countdown sirens. Announcing another match. His shoulders still had not relaxed. A door slid open behind him. Ethan glanced over one shoulder as Princess Lysara entered alone this time, wearing a dark silver robe with thin gold patterns running down the sleeves like flowing electricity. Her silver-white hair remained loosely tied behind her neck, though a few strands had fallen free around her face. Somehow she looked less like royalty tonight, and more like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. Ethan noticed she had dismissed the guards. Interesting choice. She crossed the chamber calmly and stopped several feet away. "You could attempt escape now," she said quietly. "Most gladiators would." Ethan looked back toward the rain-covered skyline. "Most gladiators probably have somewhere to run." Lysara studied him carefully. "Earth abandoned you." Ethan laughed once without humor. "Something like that." Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable this time, just cautious. The princess moved toward a nearby table carved from pale crystal stone. Steam rose from 2 untouched cups resting beside a glowing lantern. "Sit," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounded dangerously close to a polite invitation. "Do not become arrogant, human." Too late. To his surprise, she almost smiled again. Almost. Ethan lowered himself carefully into the chair across from her, every muscle protesting after the arena trial. Up close, he noticed faint silver markings beneath Lysara's eyes that shifted slightly whenever the lantern light moved. Alien biology. Beautiful in a strange, distant way that still felt impossible to fully understand. She slid one cup toward him. "Jalorian tea," she explained. "It assists muscle recovery." Ethan stared into the steaming blue liquid suspiciously. "You poison all your guests or just the expensive ones?" "You are not a guest, right? Property." "Forgot about that." The words landed harder than he intended. Lysara's expression cooled slightly. Under imperial law, arena victors belong to the throne until claimed by a noble house. "And you claimed me?" "Yes." Ethan leaned back slowly. "Why?" The rain hammered softly against the glass behind him. For the first time since meeting her, Lysara hesitated before answering. "Because everyone else in that arena wanted to see fear in your eyes." Her golden gaze lifted to meet his directly. "And you denied them." Ethan looked down at the untouched tea. "Fear still exists," he said quietly. "I just stopped letting people enjoy it." Something shifted behind her expression then. Small. Human almost. Not pity. Recognition. Lysara folded her hands carefully atop the table. "You fought in the Orion border wars." Ethan stiffened slightly. "That information is classified." "Nothing remains classified from the Imperial archives." "Good to know privacy died everywhere, not just Earth." "Your military record states you received 3 commendations for civilian extraction under combat conditions." Ethan said nothing. Lysara continued softly. "It also states you disobeyed direct orders repeatedly." "Depends who wrote the report." "And were those reports inaccurate?" Ethan finally picked up the teacup, turning it slowly in his hand while blue steam curled upward between them. "Children do not care whose flag is flying overhead," he said quietly. "If a building is collapsing, they still need somebody to carry them out." Lysara watched him in complete silence. Somewhere outside, lightning flashed across the distant towers of Vero's prime, flooding the chamber with white light for half a second. In that moment, Ethan noticed something strange. The princess was no longer studying him like a dangerous animal from the arena. She was listening, truly listening. And inside an empire built on obedience and spectacle, that might have been the rarest thing of all. Morning arrived over Veros Prime without sunlight. Thick storm clouds smothered the skyline in layers of gray while neon advertisements flickered across distant towers like artificial stars trapped beneath the atmosphere. Ethan stood near the open balcony of his assigned chamber, arms resting against the cold silver railing as wind pushed damp air through the palace levels nearly 300 feet above the city streets. Below him, streams of traffic drifted endlessly between skyscrapers. Tiny, ordered, controlled, just like everything else in this empire. Behind him, soft footsteps crossed the marble floor. Ethan did not turn around immediately. He had already learned that nobody entered these chambers without permission from the princess herself. "You have been awake for 6 hours," Lysara said calmly. "That is either discipline or paranoia." Ethan glanced back over one shoulder. Both. She carried a thin data tablet beneath one arm today, instead of wearing ceremonial jewelry. The simpler silver uniform somehow made her appear younger, though the sharp intelligence in her golden eyes remained unchanged. 2 hovering servant drones followed behind her carrying breakfast trays made from polished black crystal. Ethan eyed the trays suspiciously. "If that blue fruit starts moving, I am leaving. It is not alive." "That is exactly what something alive would want me to think." Lysara ignored the comment and approached the balcony railing beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The city noise rose faintly beneath them. Distant sirens. Engine hums. The low vibration of billions of lives stacked on top of each other inside the imperial capital. "The arena broadcast reached 14 systems overnight," she finally said. "Your decision has become controversial." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Because I did not kill somebody for applause. Because you embarrassed noble houses that profit from the arena." "Good." Her eyes shifted toward him briefly. "You truly do not fear consequences." Ethan rested both forearms against the railing. "Princess, I got sold into gladiator pits by my own command structure 3 years ago. Fear burned itself out somewhere around month 6. That answer lingered heavily between them. Lysara looked down toward the lower districts where rainwater streamed between narrow streets lined with glowing market signs. "The reports claimed you deserted during the Orion conflict." Ethan laughed quietly under his breath. "Reports say lots of things. Then tell me what happened." He stayed silent long enough that even the servant drones seemed to pause. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. "There was a colony station near the border. Mining families. Civilian. Workers. Kids." His jaw tightened slightly. "Command ordered evacuation delays because the ore refinery was worth more than the people living beside it." Lysara said nothing. Ethan continued quietly. "So I ignored orders and started pulling families out myself. The wind carried rain mist across the balcony. We got most of them onto transport ships before the station collapsed. And for that they imprisoned you?" Ethan shrugged once. "Apparently saving civilians while disobeying politicians is considered bad for military structure." Lysara studied him carefully now. Not as royalty observing property. Not even as curiosity observing a strange species. This felt different. More personal. "You lost your world because you chose compassion," she said softly. Ethan finally looked at her directly. "Funny thing is I would still do it again." The princess stared at him for several seconds without speaking. Then one of the servant drones drifted too close to the balcony edge as a gust of wind pushed rainwater across the marble floor. Its balance tilted dangerously. Before Lysara could react, Ethan caught the small machine carefully with one hand and steadied it against the railing. The drone emitted a series of nervous electronic chirps. Ethan gently adjusted one loose stabilizer panel along its side. "Easy there, buddy," he muttered. "Everybody has rough mornings." The little drone's lights shifted from red to soft green. Lysara blinked once in visible confusion. "You assisted a servant machine." Ethan released the drone carefully. It looked stressed. "It is an automated utility unit." "And?" The princess stared at him as if he had just spoken an entirely unknown language. The drone hovered uncertainly for 1 second longer before softly nudging against Ethan's shoulder in what looked suspiciously like gratitude. Ethan pointed at it immediately. "See? We are friends now." For the first time since becoming heir to the Empire, Princess Lysara laughed without restraint. The sound caught her completely off guard. Soft, bright, real. Even the rain outside suddenly seemed quieter afterward. The Imperial Gardens floated nearly 400 feet above the lower sectors of Veros Prime, suspended between massive silver support pillars that hummed softly beneath the marble pathways. Artificial waterfalls poured from elevated terraces into glowing pools lined with blue crystal reeds. Warm mist drifted through the air, carrying the scent of rain-soaked flowers and ozone from the city beyond. Ethan walked slowly beside Princess Lysara beneath an arched canopy of pale white trees whose leaves shimmered faintly whenever the wind touched them. He still could not decide if the entire empire was beautiful or deeply unsettling. Probably both. 2 royal guards followed several yards behind them in complete silence. Ethan noticed they kept watching him instead of their surroundings. "You know," he muttered quietly, "those 2 are terrible at pretending not to stare." Lysara did not look back. Commander Vayner believes humans are naturally unpredictable. Ethan glanced toward the guards briefly. That explains the death glare. He requested permission to place you back in restraints. Charming guy. A faint trace of amusement crossed her expression again. It happened more often now. Ethan had started noticing the small signs. The slight softening around her eyes. The pauses before she responded to him. The way her voice changed whenever they spoke alone instead of inside formal court chambers. Dangerous observations. He knew that already. Ahead of them, a small group of servant workers moved carefully around one of the garden pools, repairing damaged lighting panels from the previous storm. Most wore plain gray uniforms with lowered eyes. One of them stumbled while carrying a heavy energy cell nearly the size of a car battery. The metallic container slipped from his hands and crashed hard against the stone pathway with a loud crack. Instantly, the surrounding guards reacted. One stepped forward aggressively, while another barked something sharp in the Imperial language. The servant immediately dropped to his knees. Ethan stopped walking. The worker looked young, maybe 17. Thin shoulders, frightened eyes. One trembling hand pressed against the floor, while rainwater dripped from dark hair across his face. "Please forgive me," the servant whispered quickly. "The sealant was wet. I did not mean..." "Enough," one guard snapped. Lysara remained still beside Ethan, though her expression hardened slightly. Court protocol. Public discipline. Imperial image. Ethan could practically see the machinery of power turning behind everyone's eyes. Then he sighed quietly and stepped forward before anyone could stop him. One guard immediately blocked his path. "Return to position, gladiator." Ethan ignored him completely and crouched beside the fallen servant instead. The young worker stared at him in confusion. Ethan picked up the heavy energy cell with both hands and set it carefully back onto the transport cart. "There," he said calmly. "World officially survived." Several guards looked horrified. One actually reached toward a weapon before Lysara lifted her hand slightly. The entire garden froze again. Ethan extended one hand toward the servant on the ground. "Come on, kid. You are making me look short." The worker hesitated before slowly accepting the help. Ethan pulled him upright easily. "Accidents happen," he said quietly. "Anybody tells you different has never carried something heavy in the rain." The servant looked completely speechless. Not because of Ethan's words. Because nobody from the upper palace levels ever touched workers directly. Especially not acclaimed gladiators standing beside the heir to the empire. Ethan finally noticed the silence around him and glanced toward Lysara. "What?" he asked carefully. Her golden eyes remained fixed on him with an expression he could not fully read anymore. Not confusion this time. Something deeper. "You continue behaving as though status does not exist," she said softly. Ethan shrugged once. Back on Earth, gravity worked the same for everybody. One of the older servants nearby suddenly lowered his head toward Ethan in quiet respect. Then another followed. Then another. Small gestures, barely noticeable, but they spread through the garden faster than sound. The royal guards shifted uneasily. They noticed it too. Lysara slowly looked around at the workers, now watching Ethan with cautious admiration glowing behind tired eyes. And for the first time in her life, the princess realized something deeply dangerous. Compassion could spread faster than fear. The explosion started as a vibration beneath the floor. Ethan felt it through the soles of his boots half a second before the palace alarms activated. The peaceful sound of waterfalls vanished instantly beneath a sharp mechanical siren that echoed across the Imperial Gardens. Red emergency lights flooded the marble pathways. Somewhere above them, massive security doors began sealing shut with heavy metallic groans. The servant workers panicked immediately. One dropped an entire crate of crystal tools into the reflecting pool, while another sprinted toward the nearest corridor entrance. Royal guards reached for pulse rifles as communication devices crackled with overlapping voices. Security breach in the northern tower. Repeat, northern tower compromised. Protect the air immediately. Ethan's head snapped upward. High above the garden terraces, black smoke curled into the storm clouds from one of the upper palace levels. Then another blast rattled the support pillars hard enough to send ripples through the glowing pools. Lysara remained frighteningly calm beside him, though Ethan noticed the subtle tension in her posture immediately. Inside, one guard ordered sharply, stepping toward the princess. Now, another explosion interrupted him, much closer this time. Glass shattered somewhere beyond the garden walls. The hovering servant drones scattered in all directions as emergency shutters slammed down across nearby corridors. Ethan moved instantly, not toward safety, toward the terrified workers still trapped near the lower garden bridge where debris had collapsed across the exit path. One of the guards grabbed his arm hard. The air takes priority. Ethan ripped his arm free without even looking at him. Those people are trapped. They are workers. Ethan turned slowly then, and something in his expression made even the armed guards hesitate. Yeah, he said quietly. I noticed. Another tremor shook the gardens. One of the support lanterns snapped loose from above and crashed across the bridge entrance, sparks scattering across the wet marble. The servant workers screamed and backed away instinctively. Ethan sprinted forward before anyone else moved. Rain hammered across the open terraces now as storm winds tore through the garden levels. Ethan grabbed the fallen lantern support with both hands, muscles tightening across his shoulders as metal groaned against stone. Heavy, probably 600 pounds at least. Behind him, several guards shouted warnings about structural instability. Ethan ignored all of them. Move, he barked toward the trapped workers. Go now. The servants scrambled past him immediately while he held the damaged support beam high enough for them to escape beneath. One older worker stumbled halfway through. Ethan caught him by the arm without lowering the beam. Easy, he muttered through clenched teeth. One bad day at a time. Finally, the last servant cleared the bridge. Ethan released the twisted metal support and stepped backward just as the remaining structure collapsed completely into the reflecting pool with a massive splash of glowing water. The royal guards stared at him in stunned silence. Lysara did too, but there was no time to process any of it. A new sound echoed across the palace. Not explosions this time. Footsteps. Fast. Organized. Ethan turned sharply toward the eastern corridor, where emergency smoke drifted through the sealed doorway. Several armored figures emerged through the haze wearing matte black combat suits with no imperial markings. Their helmets concealed their faces entirely. Intruders. One raised a weapon toward the garden level. The guards reacted instantly, forming a defensive line around Lysara while civilians ducked behind the shattered pathways. Ethan's eyes moved rapidly across the environment. Collapsed exits. Frightened workers. Limited cover. Bad situation. Then one of the attackers spoke through an amplified helmet speaker. Deliver the air, and the workers remain unharmed. The rain seemed to freeze around them. Ethan glanced sideways toward Lysara. Her expression remained cold and controlled, but he noticed her hands tighten slightly at her sides. She knew something, or someone. Stay behind me, one guard ordered the princess. Ethan stepped forward before she could answer. You guys always pick dramatic weather for this stuff. Every helmet turned toward him. One attacker tilted his head slightly. The human gladiator. Former gladiator, Ethan corrected calmly. Trying out retirement. The lead attacker raised the weapon higher. Move aside. Ethan slowly rolled one shoulder, rainwater dripping from his hair across old scars visible beneath the collar of his combat harness. See, that sounds simple, he said quietly. But the problem is, his eyes shifted briefly toward the terrified workers still huddled behind the broken bridge, then back toward the armed intruders. I already decided nobody dies today. For the first time since arriving on Veros Prime, Princess Lysara realized something terrifyingly clear. Ethan Vale was no longer fighting because he was forced to survive. He was fighting because other people needed him to. Rainwater streamed down Ethan Vale's face as the palace gardens descended into chaos around him. Emergency sirens pulsed through the storm, while red warning lights reflected across shattered marble and flooded walkways. The intruders spread outward with disciplined precision, black armor gleaming beneath flashes of lightning. Their movements were military, clean, coordinated. Not mercenaries, not thieves. Someone trained them well. Ethan noticed that immediately. The royal guards tightened formation around Princess Lysara, while frightened workers huddled behind collapsed garden pillars. One servant quietly sobbed beside a shattered lantern drone whose lights flickered weakly in the rain. Ethan stepped slightly sideways, placing himself between the civilians and the armed figures without even thinking about it anymore. Old instincts. Marine instincts. Protect the people who cannot protect themselves. The lead attacker raised one armored hand. This does not concern the workers. Ethan glanced back briefly toward the terrified servants. Funny, he said calmly. Everything always concerns the workers. The attacker's helmet tilted slightly again. You are interfering in imperial matters, human. Yeah, I get that a lot. A sudden burst of static crackled through the palace speakers overhead. Then a cold voice echoed across the gardens. Princess Lysara, stand down immediately. Every royal guard stiffened. Lysara's expression changed for the first time since the attack began. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan looked toward her instantly. Friend of yours? The voice returned through the speakers, sharper this time. The gladiator has compromised palace security and manipulated lower servants against the throne. He is to be surrendered immediately. Ethan blinked once slowly. Wow, he muttered. That escalated fast. Commander Vayner stepped forward beside Lysara, pulse weapon raised toward the attackers. Rain streamed from the edges of his silver armor. Lord Malrith, he growled toward the speakers. You dishonor the Empire. The answer came instantly. The Empire is already dishonored. Lightning flashed across the skyline behind the palace towers. Ethan glanced toward Lysara again and finally understood. Politics, not terrorism. A power struggle. And somehow he had become the center of it. Of course he had. One attacker suddenly advanced several steps toward the workers hiding near the collapsed bridge. Ethan moved before anyone else reacted. Fast. 1 second he stood beside the princess. The next he was directly between the civilians and the advancing soldier. Rainwater splashed across the marble beneath his boots. Bad direction, Ethan said quietly. The attacker hesitated. Ethan noticed it immediately. Even armed professionals became uncertain around someone who refused to act afraid. Move aside, the soldier warned. Ethan folded his arms casually despite the storm around them. You know, back on Earth, every terrible idea usually started with somebody saying exactly that. The soldier raised his weapon slightly higher. Several royal guards tensed immediately, but Ethan kept his eyes locked forward, calm and unreadable beneath the rain. Here is the problem, he continued softly. I spent 3 years surviving arenas built to entertain cruel people. His voice lowered another degree. So men trying to scare civilians in expensive armor? Lightning flashed again across the gardens. Not exactly new territory for me. Silence spread beneath the storm. Even the attackers seemed uncertain now, because Ethan was not acting like a prisoner, or a gladiator, or property. He stood like someone who had already survived the worst thing imaginable and simply stopped caring about intimidation afterward. Beside him, Lysara watched in complete stillness. The human should have been afraid. Every logical outcome favored the attackers. Every political rule demanded obedience. Yet Ethan stood in the rain shielding people he barely knew, as though protecting strangers was the most natural thing in the universe. Then the palace speakers activated one final time. Very well, Lord Malrith's voice echoed coldly. If the human wishes to stand beside the air, a deep mechanical rumble interrupted him somewhere below the gardens. Ethan immediately recognized the sound. Heavy security gates unlocking. Not palace gates. Arena gates. His eyes narrowed. That, he said slowly, cannot possibly be good. The ground beneath the gardens vibrated again. Somewhere deep below the palace levels, ancient machinery groaned awake after years of silence. Then every light across the upper terraces flickered once before turning blood red. Commander Vayner's face lost all color. No, he whispered. Ethan looked toward him sharply. What? Another rumble shook the support pillars hard enough to crack marble beneath their feet. Vaynor stared toward the lower city levels with horror growing in his eyes. They are opening the old arena district. Even the rain suddenly felt colder after that. The old arena district woke like a dying beast beneath the city. Deep mechanical groans rolled upward through the palace foundations, while ancient power grids flickered back to life across Veros Prime. Far below the floating gardens, enormous sections of the lower city began glowing red one level at a time. Massive holoscreens activated automatically across nearby towers, flooding the storm with distorted light and static-filled broadcasts. Citizens stopped in the streets. Traffic lanes froze midair. Across the capital, millions looked toward the same forbidden district that had remained sealed for nearly 20 years. Ethan stared downward through the rain, jaw tightening as familiar memories crawled back into his mind, like old scars reopening beneath cold weather. The underground cells, the screaming crowds, the smell of metal and fear trapped beneath recycled air. You used gladiator arenas to control the population, he said quietly without looking at anyone. Commander Vaynor nodded grimly. Long ago, before the current emperor outlawed public executions. Ethan glanced sideways. Let me guess. Somebody important wants those traditions back. Before Vaynor could answer, the giant holoscreens surrounding the palace crackled alive overhead. A tall alien figure appeared against a dark ceremonial backdrop lined with imperial symbols. Lord Malrith, older than Lysara by decades. Pale silver skin, cold eyes sharpened by years of political power. The storm distorted his image slightly across the rain-soaked skyline, making him appear even larger above the city. Citizens of Veros Prime, his amplified voice echoed through the thunder. Your empire stands at the edge of corruption. Ethan muttered under his breath. Here comes the speech. Malrith continued calmly. The royal heir has endangered imperial stability by placing faith in an uncontrolled human gladiator whose influence now spreads through the palace itself. Around the gardens, several servant workers lowered their eyes nervously. Ethan noticed immediately. Fear. Years of it. Built carefully into every layer of this empire. The throne has forgotten strength, Malrith declared. Compassion has made us weak. Ethan slowly folded his arms. There it is. But then something unexpected happened. Princess Lysara stepped forward into the center of the ring. Not behind the guards. Not behind Ethan. Forward. Lightning flashed across the gardens as silver water streamed down her white hair and dark ceremonial robes. Every royal guard froze. Even the attackers hesitated slightly. Lysara lifted her head toward the massive holoscreens hanging over the city. Her voice carried clearly despite the storm. Strength without compassion is not civilization. Silence hit the gardens instantly. Across the city, millions heard her words. Through the emergency broadcasts, Lord Malrith's expression darkened. You speak emotionally, child. No, Lysara answered calmly. I speak honestly. Ethan stared at her quietly from several feet away. This was no longer political caution. No longer royal diplomacy. She was openly defying one of the most powerful men in the empire in front of the entire planet. Malrith's voice sharpened. You defend a violent outsider over your own bloodline. Lysara turned slightly then, her golden eyes finding Ethan through the rain for half a second before facing the city again. The human gladiator protected workers while armed nobles threatened them. Her voice remained steady. He showed more honor in chains than many leaders show upon thrones. The palace gardens fell completely still. Ethan actually blinked in surprise. Princess, Commander Vaynor warned quietly. Careful. But Lysara did not stop. For generations we taught this empire that fear creates order. She continued across the stormlit city. Yet one human warrior walked into our arena and reminded people what dignity looks like. Below the floating gardens, distant crowds had begun gathering in the streets despite the rain. Ethan could see them now through the towering holoscreens. Workers, servants, lower district citizens staring upward toward the palace with expressions he recognized immediately. Hope. Dangerous hope. Lord Malrith noticed it too. His face hardened instantly. You have been manipulated. Lysara's eyes narrowed slightly. No. Rainwater rolled down her face beneath flashes of white lightning. I have been awakened. The words echoed across the entire city. Ethan felt something shift in the atmosphere afterward. Not politically, emotionally. Like an invisible wall inside the Empire had cracked for the first time in centuries. Then the emergency alarms suddenly changed tone. Lower. Urgent. Commander Vayner's expression tightened instantly as new alerts flashed across his wrist display. Princess, he said sharply. The lower arena gates are fully open. Ethan looked down toward the glowing red districts beneath the city. Thousands of old combat drones were waking up below them, one system at a time. And somewhere deep beneath the palace, ancient arena crowds had already started gathering again. The old arena district glowed beneath the storm like a wound reopening across the city. Red emergency lights pulsed through layers of black towers while ancient hollow projectors awakened one after another above Veros Prime. From the floating palace gardens, Ethan could now hear the distant roar rising from the lower sectors. Crowds, thousands of them, drawn toward the forbidden district by fear, curiosity, or something far more dangerous. Hope. Rain hammered across the marble pathways as Commander Vayner barked orders into his communicator. Royal guards rushed civilians toward evacuation corridors while alarm sirens echoed endlessly through the storm. But Ethan barely heard any of it anymore. His eyes remained fixed on the city below. The arena crowds are gathering again, he said quietly. Malrith wants spectacle. Lysara stepped beside him beneath the rain. Fear is easier to control when people are entertained. Ethan glanced sideways toward her. You always sound that depressing, or is today special? To his surprise, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly despite everything happening around them. Tiny. Exhausted. Real. Then another tremor rolled through the city hard enough to shake the floating gardens beneath their feet. Somewhere below, one of the ancient combat towers collapsed inward, sending a cloud of sparks into the night sky. Panic spread instantly through the lower streets. Ethan could see it clearly now on the giant hollow screens. Civilians running. Workers trapped between security barricades. Old arena drones activating without command authorization. The Empire was losing control of itself. Commander Vayner approached quickly through the rain. Princess, he said sharply. We need to evacuate you immediately. Lysara did not move. And the lower districts? Vayner hesitated. Ethan already knew the answer before he spoke. Containment protocols are prioritizing the palace sectors. Ethan let out one tired breath through his nose. Of course they are. Without another word, he started walking toward the emergency transport platform. Near the edge of the gardens, Vayner immediately stepped in front of him. Where are you going? Ethan looked toward the burning lower city. People are trapped down there. The lower sectors are unstable. Yeah, I noticed the explosions. Human, Vayner snapped. Those districts are collapsing. Ethan shrugged once. Then I should probably get moving. Lysara watched him silently through the rain. You would go back? She asked quietly. Ethan turned toward her. Water dripped from his hair across the old scars lining his face and neck. Princess, I spent 3 years surviving arenas because powerful people decided ordinary lives were expendable. His voice remained calm. Steady. I am not standing up here while it happens again. The storm seemed quieter after that. Even Vayner had no response. Ethan reached the transport platform and grabbed a fallen emergency jacket from one of the workers nearby before pausing briefly. You should stay here, he told Lysara. Your empire kind of needs you alive. But instead of answering, the princess stepped forward through the rain until she stood directly in front of him. Close enough now that Ethan could see tiny silver patterns shifting beneath her skin beneath each flash of lightning. Close enough to notice the fear she had hidden from everyone else all night. Not fear for herself. Fear for him. Slowly, carefully, Lysara lifted one hand toward the metallic control band still locked around Ethan's wrist. The symbol of ownership. Gladiator property. The Empire's mark. Rainwater rolled silently down her fingers as she touched the control seal. A soft mechanical click echoed between them. Then the restraint band unlocked and fell into Ethan's hand. For a moment, neither moved. Around them, palace alarms continued screaming across the storm. Guards shouted evacuation orders. Fire reflected against the clouds over Veros Prime. But inside that single quiet moment, none of it seemed to matter. Lysara looked directly into Ethan's eyes. You were never property, she said softly. Ethan stared down at the broken restraint band resting in his palm. 3 years inside cages and arenas. 3 years surviving because survival was all anyone expected from him anymore. Yet somehow this alien princess standing beneath a burning sky had just given him something the Empire never could. His humanity back. Ethan slowly looked up at her again. "You know," he said quietly, "for royalty, you are surprisingly decent." A small laugh escaped her despite the tears mixing with rain across her face. Ethan smiled faintly in return before stepping backward onto the transport platform. Engines hummed awake beneath his boots. Below them, the old arena district burned red against the storm-dark city. Ethan glanced toward it one final time, then back toward Lysara standing alone beneath the rain and palace lights. Neither spoke again. They did not need to. Because somewhere between the arena chains and the falling empire, an alien princess had stopped seeing a gladiator. And a broken human warrior had finally remembered he was still a man.